They slapped the calabash from his hands, and the water he had carried since dawn spread into the red dust like something too poor to be protected. The boy dropped to his knees at once, not to argue, not to beg. He could not do either. He had no voice. He only had his hands, and those hands moved fast over the ground, trying to rescue what could not be gathered back. The market women laughed. One of the men standing near the yam stall kicked the empty gourd farther away with the lazy cruelty of someone who had never once imagined that life might turn and test him. And then, as the boy bent lower, the cloth tied around his head loosened and slipped back just enough to reveal a thin, crescent-shaped scar behind his right ear. Queen Naima saw it from the royal carriage and went cold. Because that scar did not belong to an ordinary child. That scar belonged to the son she had buried in her heart 18 years ago. The morning Quito entered Mavuno Market had begun like every other morning of his life. Before sunrise. Before the village cocks finished their first loud boasting. Before the women lit cooking fires, and before the smell of cassava, pepper, palm oil, and charcoal braided itself into the breathing air of the town. He had risen from the woven mat in the small mud room he rented near the old baobab grove. He folded his blanket. He washed in a basin of water gone cool from the night. He tied his faded blue cloth around his waist, lifted the yoke that rested across his shoulders, and checked the 4 calabashes hanging from it by rope. Then he stepped out into the gray quiet of dawn and began the long walk toward the eastern well. Quito was 18 years old. He was tall, in the awkward way boys become men before they have time to understand what their limbs are doing. His hands were rough. His feet were broad and scarred by paths walked too many times in poor sandals. His face would have been handsome to anyone patient enough to notice it, but most people never were. They saw only a quiet boy with no family name, no inheritance, no speech, and no defender. In a place where noise often passed for importance, silence made people assume smallness. He had not always lived alone. Once there had been Mama Sela, the old basket weaver who found him near the river road when he was a small child, with fever on his skin and terror in his eyes. She took him in, raised him, taught him how to count with pebbles, how to read mood from footsteps, how to hear dishonesty in the pauses between words. She taught him how to survive on almost nothing, and how to keep the little dignity this world leaves for the poor if they guard it fiercely enough. Before she died 3 years earlier, she had pressed both her hands around his face and told him the only secret she had never fully explained. Never let anyone harm you for being quiet. And if anyone ever asks about the scar behind your ear, leave that place immediately. She had not told him why. Quito had wanted to ask, but by then illness had thinned her voice and shortened her breath. She died before the answer came. So he kept the warning the way poor people keep everything valuable, not because it made sense, but because it was all he had. Each morning he hauled water from the eastern well to the market and sold cupfuls to traders, travelers, potters, and women who were too busy haggling to walk to the well themselves. It was hard work, but the kind of hard work that at least contained a promise. If he filled enough calabashes, if he walked fast enough, if he lost little to spills and thieves, then by evening there would be enough coins for millet, lamp oil, soap every few days, and once in a while, a little dried fish. It was not much, but it was a life that answered to effort. By the time the first sunlight touched the roofs of Mavuno, Quito was already inside the market lanes. He knew who bought early and who paid late. He knew which butchers would wave him over with 2 fingers and then argue over half a coin, and which old women would quietly add an extra cowrie because they had seen him working in the rain. He knew which children would make faces at him and mimic his silence with cruel delight. He knew how to smile without resentment and move on. If this story reaches you in your heart, stay with it to the end, because some truths walk a very long road before they are finally seen in daylight. Now you must understand the woman who ruled the center lane of Mavuno Market. Her name was Madame Binta. She sold imported cloth, beads from the coast, dyed wrappers in royal blues and deep reds, and headscarves bright enough to turn every passing face toward her stall. She was rich in the way wealth announces itself long before a person speaks. Her fingers carried gold rings, her ankles wore silver. Even her impatience seemed dressed better than other people. She had 2 grown nephews, Tade and Moro, who worked for her and learned from her the small daily art of humiliating anyone weaker than themselves. Madame Binta did not think of herself as cruel. That would have required self-knowledge. She thought of herself as important, and important people often do damage without ever changing the name they give their own behavior. For nearly a year, she had wanted Quito gone from the center lane. Not because he interfered with her cloth trade. A silent water seller was no threat to a woman who counted bolts of fabric by the dozen. No. What offended her was simpler and more poisonous. Quito's place near the shade post brought steady customers. Travelers stopped there. Women rinsed their hands there. Potters cooled their throats there. His little patch of ground, earned only by arriving before dawn every day, had become useful. Useful space becomes expensive space. And expensive space attracts the appetite of people who already have more than enough. 3 times Madame Binta had told him by gesture and sharp tone to move farther back toward the goat pens. 3 times he had bowed his head politely and remained where he was after she turned away, because the market elder himself had once indicated that the spot was free so long as Quito came early and disturbed no one. Quito had no words with which to defend himself, but he had law on his side, and sometimes that is enough to anger the unjust more than open defiance ever could. That morning, Madame Binta arrived already in a temper. One shipment of coastal lace had been delayed. A customer from the district seat had insulted the quality of her last wrapper. Worse, she had heard a rumor that the Queen's Road procession might pass through Mavuno before noon, and she wanted her stall to look grander than every other stall in sight. She saw Quito placing his filled calabashes carefully beneath the shade post. She saw the small line of early customers waiting for water. She saw, with rising irritation, that his poor little business looked secure. And because her mood demanded a victim, she chose him. "Move those things," she snapped. Quito turned at once. He recognized her voice. Everyone in Mavuno recognized her voice. It was the sort of voice that had never needed kindness to get what it wanted. He touched his chest lightly, then pointed to the ground and bowed his head, a gesture he used when he meant, "This is my place. I will be careful." Madame Binta's mouth tightened. "Did you not hear me?" she said, loudly enough for 3 nearby stalls to pause and listen. "Must the whole market bend around one dumb boy and his muddy water?" Some laughed at that. People laugh too easily when the humiliation is not their own. Quito bent again to lift one calabash aside so customers could pass more freely. He was trying to show cooperation, not surrender. But tyranny does not recognize the difference. It only notices whether someone has given it total victory. Tade came from the side, grinning. He was a wide-shouldered man with a restless cruelty in him, the kind that enjoys an audience. He nudged one of the hanging gourds with his foot. Water sloshed over the rim. Moro laughed. "Careful," he said. "Perhaps the silent prince will curse us." That earned louder laughter. Quito reached quickly for the yoke, but Tade slapped the nearest calabash down before he could secure it. The water burst over the dust. Moro kicked another vessel sideways. It rolled, struck a stone, and cracked open. Then someone clapped. Then someone whistled. And just like that, the market became what markets sometimes become when conscience leaves them. A theater built from someone else's pain. Quito dropped to his knees and gathered the ropes. He tried to lift the cracked gourd before more water escaped. He moved fast, not frantic, because he had long ago learned that panic gives cruel people a second pleasure. His headcloth slipped with the motion. Just a little. Just enough. At that exact moment, the royal procession entered the market road. Queen Naima had not meant to stop in Mavuno. She was traveling from the northern farms toward the district shrine, accompanied by 2 guards, her chief attendant, and a small relief escort carrying grain records and petitions from surrounding villages. She had chosen a modest carriage rather than a full ceremonial train because after 18 years of rule, she preferred to see people without too much warning. People tidy their suffering when they know power is coming. Surprise tells a truer story. She would have passed straight through if not for the commotion ahead. "What is happening there?" she asked. Her driver slowed the horses. The market lane parted in that uneasy, rippling way crowds do when authority draws near. Queen Naima looked toward the sound of laughter and saw a boy in the dust, thin shoulders bent, broken calabash at his knees, water darkening the ground around him. She saw Madame Binta standing above him with the stiff righteousness of a person already preparing to explain why her own cruelty had actually been discipline. The queen had seen such scenes before. Poverty attracts contempt from those most frightened of falling into it themselves. Then Quito lifted his head. The cloth at the side of his face had slipped back, and behind his right ear, half hidden by tightly curled hair, was the mark. A small crescent scar, curved clean and pale against dark skin, no longer than the top joint of a finger. Queen Naima's breath stopped, not because she wondered what it was, because she knew. 18 years earlier, when her son had been 7 days old, the royal naming rite had been performed at dawn in the inner chamber of the palace. According to the oldest custom of the House of Edessa, the firstborn heir received a ceremonial moon mark. Not a tattoo, not a paint, but a tiny sacred cut made by the royal birth priest with a crescent blade of silver blessed at the river shrine. It was old tradition, older than the kingdom's walls. A mark meant to identify the child of the throne, even if cloth, status, or witness were stripped away. Only 3 people alive knew precisely where that scar was placed: the queen, the birth priest, and the old nurse who had vanished on the same night the prince disappeared. The queen had spent 18 years teaching her face not to break whenever memory reached for that child. She had learned to govern through drought, disputes, trade wars, council betrayals, border raids, and funerals. She had learned to speak with calm when inside her there remained one room forever filled with the unanswered cry of a mother whose baby had been stolen in darkness. Now that room burst open. "Stop the carriage," she said, but her driver had already stopped. She stepped down before her attendant could offer a hand. The market fell silent in stages. First the nearest traders, then the ones behind them, then the lane beyond. Voices died. Even the goats tethered near the grain shed seemed suddenly quieter, as though the whole place sensed something had shifted, but did not yet know its name. Queen Naima walked through the crowd and stopped before Quito. He was still kneeling, one hand on the cracked calabash, one on the wet rope. His eyes lifted to her face, then dropped at once in respect. He had never stood this close to royalty. He knew the queen only from festivals viewed at a distance, and from the stamped profile on the largest coin he had never possessed. The queen did not look at Madame Binta first, though Madame Binta was already dropping into an elaborate greeting. She did not look at Tade or Moro or the broken gourd. She looked only at the boy. "Raise your head," she said softly. Quito obeyed. "Move the cloth from your ear." He hesitated, not out of defiance, out of confusion. Her chief attendant stepped forward, but the queen lifted one hand to stop her. She repeated herself, still quiet, still steady. "Move the cloth." Quito reached slowly and pulled the wrap back. There it was, the crescent, faded with time, but undeniable. Queen Naima stared at it long enough that several people in the crowd began to look at one another with fear. Madame Binta found her voice first. "Your Majesty," she said quickly, "this boy has been obstructing the lane. We were only correcting—" "Be silent." The queen did not raise her tone. She did not need to. Power that knows itself rarely shouts. Madame Binta's mouth closed. The queen knelt. That shocked the market more than anything else could have done. Queens do not kneel in dust before poor boys, not unless something greater than rank has entered the moment. "What is your name?" she asked. Quito touched his throat, then lowered his hand. He shook his head once. "He cannot speak, Your Majesty," someone whispered from the crowd. The queen's gaze sharpened. "Who cares for him?" No one answered immediately. At last, old Juma, the bean seller, cleared his throat from 2 stalls away. "He lives alone, Majesty. The basket weaver who raised him died some years back. The boy sells water, keeps to himself, harms no one." "Since when has he been here?" "Many years, Majesty. Since he was small." The queen looked back at Quito. Up close she could see things that struck her with cruel force. The angle of the jaw, the shape of the eyebrows, the line between the nose and mouth that echoed a face she had seen every day in her own mirror and every season in her late husband's portraits. It was not certainty, not yet. But certainty had already begun to move under her skin like fire. "What was the basket weaver's name?" she asked the crowd. "Mama Sella," said Juma. The queen stood. "Bring the boy. Bring the broken calabashes. Bring the market elder. And you," she turned at last to Madame Binta, Tade, and Moro, "you will remain available to answer for what happened here." No one moved for half a heartbeat. Then everyone moved at once. Quito was too stunned to resist as a palace guard gently relieved him of the yoke. Another gathered the surviving calabashes. The market elder arrived, puffing from the far lane, confused and nervous. Madame Binta had gone pale beneath her powder. Tade stared at the ground. Moro looked as though he wished himself anywhere else on earth. The queen turned again to Quito. "Do not be afraid," she said. and though she had not meant the words to tremble, they did. The palace of Edessa stood on a low ridge above the river plain, white-walled and broad, built to catch the evening breeze. Quito had never passed its outer gate before that day. Now he entered through the central arch beneath carved wooden doors, taller than any building he had ever slept inside. Courtyards opened one after another. Fountains murmured, guards bowed. Attendants moved in sandals so soft they seemed to float. The air smelled of incense, polished wood, old stone, and something floral he could not name. For a boy who had lived by well rope, market dust, and cooking smoke, it felt less like entering a home than stepping into a story people told other people. He was taken first not to the public hall, but to a private receiving chamber, lined with woven wall cloths and lit by filtered afternoon sun. Food was brought, water to wash, fresh garments. He touched none of it until a servant gestured kindly that he should. He was hungry, but caution lived in him deeper than appetite. Queen Naima entered alone, except for one elderly woman carrying a lacquered box. The queen sat opposite him, not on the raised chair but on the same level. "My name you know," she said. "Yours I do not." Quito took a breath, then used the quick hand signs Mama Sela had taught him and a few local gestures traders understood. He pointed to himself and traced a K on the floor with wet finger from his drinking cup, then an I, then T, then O. "Quito," the queen repeated. He nodded. "Did Mama Sela tell you where you came from?" He shook his head. "Did she say anything about this scar?" His eyes changed at once. Not fear exactly. Recognition. He touched behind his ear and then, slowly, pressed one hand flat over his heart, then pointed outward as if indicating distance. Then he held two fingers up like a walking person and mimed leaving fast. The elderly woman with the box, Lady Ifara, had served the royal household since before the queen's marriage. She leaned closer. "He is saying she told him to go if anyone asked about it." Quito nodded again, grateful to be understood. Queen Naima closed her eyes briefly. Lady Ifara set the lacquered box on the low table and opened it. Inside, wrapped in pale cloth, lay a tiny silver crescent blade, darkened with age. Quito looked at it without comprehension. The queen did not. She looked as if the room had tilted beneath her. "This," she said quietly, "was used only once, on the 7th morning after my son was born." Silence spread through the chamber. Lady Ifara spoke carefully. "Majesty, resemblance can deceive. Hope can deceive more than resemblance." "Yes," the queen said, "which is why I will not call him what my heart has already called him. Not yet." She faced Quito again. "There will be questions, records to examine, people to summon. No harm will come to you here." Quito's fingers tightened around the edge of his seat. "No harm will come to you here." He wanted to believe it, but poor children grow up learning that safety often speaks before danger enters. He gave the queen a small, uncertain nod. That evening, while palace scribes pulled old birth ledgers and road reports from the archive vault, a writer was sent to bring the nearest surviving witness to royal events of 18 years earlier. Baba Tembo, the former birth priest who had retired to a river village after losing his sight in one eye. Another message went to district records, requesting the death report of Mama Sela. A third was sent to market authorities for statements on where Quito had first been seen as a child. By nightfall, the palace had become a house full of footsteps. There are moments when a hidden truth, once disturbed, begins pulling every thread around it loose. This was one of them. Quito was given a room overlooking the inner garden. He did not sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, new cloth folded stiffly around him, and listened to a place too quiet to trust. In the market there had always been noise. Coughing, singing, complaints, babies crying, goats shouting their endless goat nonsense, men boasting, women bargaining, pestles pounding grain. Noise had made sense. Silence this rich felt dangerous. At some hour past midnight he rose and went to the window. From the courtyard below he heard voices. The Queen's voice. A man answered her, low, controlled, familiar with command. "The council must be informed at dawn," he said. "No," the Queen replied. "Not the full council, not yet." "Majesty, if this is what you think it is, then delay invites interference." "Which is precisely why I will choose carefully who hears it first." The man paused. "You suspect someone in the council?" There was a longer silence. 18 years ago, said the Queen, my son disappeared from a guarded nursery. A nurse vanished. A gate watchman died on the road. A report was misplaced. A witness recanted. I no longer suspect. I remember. Quito drew back from the window, pulse rising. He had understood only pieces. Son, council, disappeared. But pieces were enough to tell him that whatever storm had begun around him was older than his own life. At dawn, Baba Tembo arrived. He was carried in a covered litter because age had bent his knees. His back was bowed, but his mind had not dimmed. He was brought into the same chamber where Quito sat with Lady Afara. The Queen entered moments later with Captain Jabari, head of palace security, a broad-shouldered man whose face looked carved from obedience and old patience. Baba Tembo squinted with his good eye. "Where is the boy?" Quito stood. "Come closer." He obeyed. The old priest lifted trembling fingers to the right side of Quito's head and gently turned it toward the light. He traced the crescent scar with a touch as light as prayer. Then he withdrew his hand as though burned. "I made this mark," he said. The room stopped breathing. "You are certain?" asked the Queen. Baba Tembo laughed once, without humor. "Majesty, I buried my own wife. I forgot where I placed my walking staff twice last month. But this I did not forget. I prayed over the child. I cut the moon mark myself. The scar was placed high and hidden, exactly here, by your instruction, so no pretender would guess it. This boy bears it." Queen Naima gripped the back of a chair. Captain Jabari's jaw tightened. Lady Ifara covered her mouth. Quito looked from one face to another, not understanding every word, but understanding enough. The Queen's son. The room was speaking as though he might be that child. Baba Tembo lowered himself carefully into the chair provided for him. "There is more," he said. "On the night the prince vanished, the nurse on duty was not alone. Someone with rank entered the nursery before moonset. I said so then. No one wished to hear it." Captain Jabari stepped forward. "Why did you not name the person?" "Because I did not see the face clearly," said the old priest. "But I saw the ring. A signet ring with a split lion crest. That crest belonged to only one branch of the royal household." The Queen's eyes sharpened. "My husband's younger brother." Baba Tembo bowed his head once. Prince Salim. Even now, 18 years later, the name entered the room like rot uncovered beneath polished wood. Salim had been the king's younger brother and, after the king's death 2 years later from fever, the queen's most publicly loyal advisor. Ambitious but smooth. Helpful in the manner of men who volunteer for every funeral and every document and every delicate duty because power likes to travel disguised as service. Over the years, he had positioned himself near treasury decisions, military appointments, and provincial trade. He had never openly challenged the queen. He had never needed to. He simply waited, gathered, and smiled. Captain Jabari spoke with care. Majesty, accusation against a royal uncle requires proof stronger than memory. Yes, said the queen. Then let us find proof. And proof, when guilt has grown proud with time, often begins in the places guilt forgot to keep tidy. By noon, the archive clerks located a sealed packet misfiled under flood damage assessments from the year of the prince's disappearance. Inside was a nurse's unfinished statement. The handwriting was rushed and slanted, ink blotted in places, as though written by someone afraid of being interrupted. The statement mentioned a child taken under orders from above, a payment promised for silence, and a plan to injure the throat so the boy could never call his true name if found. It ended abruptly, mid-line. Quito's hands went cold when Lady Afara read that sentence aloud for the queen. Injure the throat. He touched his neck without thinking. A palace physician was summoned at once. The physician, Dr. Nuru, examined him with gentle precision. He asked Quito to breathe, swallow, open his mouth, hum if he could. Quito tried. The sound that came was broken air, nothing more. Dr. Nuru leaned back slowly. This was not birth, he said. There is scarring deep in the vocal passage, old, deliberate, possibly caused by a burning tincture or corrosive preparation administered in early childhood. The queen turned away and pressed her fist against her lips. No mother should have to imagine what was done to her child when she was not there to stop it. But that day, Queen Naima imagined all of it. And yet the worst wound was still waiting. Captain Jabari spent the afternoon tracing old money routes through trade ledgers. Prince Salim had always appeared clean, because princes who plan carefully do not place dirty coins in their own names. But indirect payments leave shadows. A retired caravan broker was found in the city and questioned. A former gate guard, now sick and half forgotten in his sister's home, was brought under escort. By evening, 2 separate testimonies aligned with the same story. 18 years earlier, under cover of a traveling caravan, a child had been taken from the palace and handed to a woman instructed to go south and never speak. That woman had died of fever before finishing the journey. The child, sick and nearly voiceless, had later been found by Mama Sella near the river road, wrapped in cloth finer than anything she could explain owning. The final proof came after sunset. One of Captain Jabari's men, searching an old treasury storage room, found a ledger hidden inside the false bottom of a grain chest. The hand was Prince Salim's. Several coded entries matched dates of bribe transfers, and beside one entry, so casually written it was almost unbearable to read, were the words, "Moonchild settled, voice gone, no claim possible." Captain Jabari carried the ledger himself to the queen. She read the line once, then again. Then she laid the book down with a care more frightening than rage. "Seal the prince's residence," she said. "No one enters. No one leaves. Bring him before me at first light." Prince Selim arrived the next morning dressed perfectly. That was the kind of man he was. Some people, when guilt approaches judgment, look disordered by fear. Others become even more exact, as though neatness might still negotiate with consequence. Selim entered the council chamber in cream robes with gold embroidery at the cuffs, his beard trimmed, his sandals polished, his expression pitched precisely between concern and wounded confusion. He bowed to the Queen. "Majesty, your summons was urgent. I came at once." Quito stood near the far pillar, with Lady Ifara beside him and Captain Jabari behind. He had never before seen Selim, yet the instant the prince's eyes slid across his face and paused, only paused, just one fraction longer than courtesy required, Quito felt a chill that ran deeper than memory. Some truths are known first by the body. Queen Naima did not invite Selim to sit. "Do you recognize this boy?" she asked. Selim looked again, longer this time. If he felt anything, he mastered it quickly. "No, Majesty." Captain Jabari set the hidden ledger on the table. "And this?" Selim's gaze fell to the open page. One breath, no more. "I do not read stolen books from storage rooms," he said mildly. "You will," said the Queen, "if the book contains your own hand." Selim smiled then, not warmly, not openly, just enough to show the man beneath the years of polished loyalty. "Majesty," he said, "I have served this throne faithfully since your husband died." "You have served yourself faithfully," the Queen replied. "That, at least, I now believe." Captain Jabari began reading the testimonies aloud. The caravan broker, the gate guard, the nurse's unfinished statement, Dr. Nuru's findings, Baba Tembo's identification of the moon mark. Finally, the coded ledger entries and the line no one in the room could unhear. Moonchild settled, voice gone, no claim possible. Selim waited until the last word faded. Then he laughed softly. It was not the laugh of a man amused. It was the laugh of a man who has discovered that the game is over and sees no further use in pretending he was ever playing by the same rules as everyone else. "So," he said, "the river returns what was thrown into it." Queen Naima stared at him. "You admit it?" Selim spread his hands. "Admit? Majesty, let us be honest at last. Your husband was weak, sentimental. The kingdom needed certainty. And then a son was born to secure your side forever. A baby with no talent, no strength, no earned wisdom, only blood. Do you know how kingdoms fall? Not always by invasion, often by accident of inheritance. He was an infant. He was an obstacle. The word landed like poison. Quito could not speak, but his whole body drew tight with it. Selim continued, almost conversational now, because some wicked men become most truthful once they think they can no longer be stopped by shame. "I did not order his death," he said. "I am not a monster." Captain Jabari's face hardened into something near contempt. "No," said the Queen. "You merely ordered that he be robbed of name, mother, voice, and future." Selim's expression sharpened. "I ordered practicality. A dead prince creates martyrs and investigations. A vanished prince creates grief, and grief grows tired. I needed time. Time gave me influence. Influence gave me stability. Had events continued properly, this kingdom would eventually have come to me through necessity. Necessity, repeated the queen. What a graceful word for evil. Quito stepped forward before anyone stopped him. He did not know exactly what he meant to do. He only knew that after hearing the shape of his life spoken by the man who had broken it, stillness became impossible. He stood directly before Prince Selim and looked into his face. Selim looked back with a detached curiosity that was almost more terrible than hatred. Then Quito did something no one expected. He lifted one hand to his own throat. He pressed his fingers there. Then he pointed at Selim. Then he opened his mouth and forced out sound. At first, it was only air, then a torn, ragged vibration. Then one broken syllable dragged upward from the oldest wound in him. Whew. He stopped, choking on effort. Lady Afara moved, but he raised his hand, refusing help. Again. Whew-ee. The word was shredded, barely a word at all, but everyone heard it. Why? In that chamber full of rank, law, old grief, and fresh revelation, the first true judgment did not come from the queen or the captain or the records. It came from the ruined voice of the son who had survived. Selim's face changed for the first time. Only a little. Only enough to show that somewhere, under ambition layered for 18 years, something human still understood the weight of being asked why by the person he had tried to erase. But remorse did not reach him. Not fully. It was never about you, he said. The queen closed her eyes at that, as though even now his selfishness retained the power to disgust her in new ways. Take him, she said. Selim was placed under guard, pending formal royal tribunal. His titles were suspended before noon. By evening, the news had already begun to move beyond the palace walls, because nothing travels faster than the collapse of a powerful lie. But truth alone does not heal what truth discovers. That same day, Dr. Nuru returned with an older healer from the mountain district, Mother Zawadi, a woman spoken of in the kingdom with the careful respect reserved for people who know both medicine and memory. She examined Quito's throat, listened to the history, and said what no one dared hope too quickly. The damage is old, she said, but not total. The voice was injured, not destroyed. If he has courage, and if he is patient, words may yet come. May, not will. Sometimes hope enters as quietly as that single word. The queen asked Quito with her eyes if he wished to try. He looked at Mother Zawadi, then at Dr. Nuru, then at the queen. Finally, he nodded. The treatment began the next morning. It was not magic. Healing almost never is. It was steam and bitter infusions, breathing exercises, oils warmed with herbs, controlled sounds coaxed from a throat that had forgotten the shape of speaking. It was pain, frustration, failure on 1 hour, followed by progress so small another person might not notice it. But Mother Zawadi noticed everything. She was not impressed by despair, and this made her a very useful person to have nearby. Again, she would say, and Quito would try again. Over the next 10 days, the tribunal preparations filled the palace. Chiefs were summoned from neighboring regions. Treasury clerks assembled evidence. Witnesses were housed under guard. Prince Selim's former servants, sensing which direction survival now leaned,
began remembering details they had once misplaced. Madame Binta and her nephews were also called to provide statements regarding the market assault, though compared to royal treason, their cruelty seemed almost small. Yet, cruelty is never small to the person underneath it, and the Queen did not intend to let that morning vanish into the shadow of larger crimes. During those days, another change took place in the palace, one quieter and far more difficult than public scandal. A mother and son, strangers to each other by theft, began the slow work of becoming family. Queen Naima did not force it. Wisdom saved her from that. She did not rush into calling him by childhood names he had never heard. She did not drown him in jewels or ceremonies, or public affection meant more for her own relief than for his comfort. She sat with him in the garden. She asked what foods he liked. She learned the hand signs Mama Sela had taught him. She told him about his father, not as a king first, but as a man who laughed too loudly at his own poor jokes and always fed the palace dogs from his own plate when he thought no one saw. She spoke of the moon festival the year he was born, of the cloth he had been wrapped in,
Of the lullaby she used to hum when he cried just before dawn. Quito listened. Sometimes he turned away because the ache of hearing what had been stolen was almost too sharp to bear. Sometimes he stayed. Sometimes, when she rose to leave, he touched 2 fingers to his chest and then toward her, his private sign for, "I heard you." On the 12th day, he managed his second clear word. "Ma." He had not even meant to say it aloud. He had been reaching for water. The Queen, seated beside him beneath the fig tree, froze as though struck by light. "Do not strain," Mother Zawadi warned. But the Queen was already weeping silently, not from spectacle, not with great dramatic sound, just with the exhausted gratitude of a grief finally given one place to rest. The tribunal opened 3 days later in the Great Hall. Every bench was full. Chiefs in ceremonial robes, elders from market wards, military officers, scribes, petitioners turned witnesses to history. Word had spread far beyond Mavuno. Some came because they loved justice, some because they loved scandal. Human beings are rarely pure in their motives, but truth can still use a crowd. Prince Salim was brought in under guard. Madame Binta stood to one side, with Tade and Moro behind her, looking so shrunken by fear that one might almost have pitied them, if one had forgotten how large they had seemed while humiliating a voiceless boy in the dust. Queen Naima presided, but judgment was shared according to law with a panel of regional chiefs and the high legal elder. Captain Jabari presented the evidence. Witness after witness spoke. The ledger was entered. Baba Tembo identified the moon mark before the full assembly. Dr. Nuru testified regarding the throat injury. Mother Zawadi testified that the muteness had been induced, consistent with the nurse's statement. The caravan broker described the transfer of a drugged child. The former gate guard described being ordered away from his post. The whole architecture of the crime, once hidden by years, now stood before the hall, beam by beam. Prince Salim defended himself first with denial, then with argument, then with bitterness. He said kingdoms required hard choices. He said blood alone should not decide destiny. He said he had acted to protect the realm from uncertainty. But there is something thin and pitiful about ambition once stripped of disguise. The hall heard him. The hall did not believe him. Then the legal elder asked if the injured party wished to make a statement. All eyes turned to Quito. He rose slowly. His speech was still not smooth. Each word required care. Each phrase cost him effort. But perhaps that made what he said more powerful, not less, because every syllable sounded earned. He did not stand like a court-trained prince. He stood like someone who had carried water through heat, slept hungry, and learned to survive laughter without becoming cruel himself. He paused, breathed, continued. I was nobody to many people. The hall went still. I know. Dust, hunger, mocking, doors closed, hands that push, eyes that do not see. He glanced once toward Madame Binta. She lowered her head. Then he looked at Salim. You tried to make me disappear. But I lived. The words were rough, but they held. I lived, without name, without voice, without truth. And still, I lived. No ornament, no royal flourish, no memorized rhetoric, just truth. Quito swallowed hard and went on. If power makes a man hurt, a child, then power is sickness. A murmur moved through the hall. I do not ask revenge. He took another breath, steadier now. I ask that what was hidden be named, fully, so no one can bury it again. That was all. He sat. And in that moment, nearly everyone in the hall understood what rank had failed to teach them for years. Dignity does not descend from a throne. Sometimes it rises from the dust. The judgment took 2 hours. Prince Salim was stripped of title, lands, council authority, treasury privileges, and all succession rights. His properties were seized pending redistribution to Crown Trust and Public Works. He was sentenced to lifelong confinement under guarded estate exile, not from mercy exactly, but because the chiefs judged that a slow life lived in the knowledge of one's own exposure would be a harder punishment than swift death. The former gate conspirators were condemned according to their degree of involvement. The hidden funds were ordered returned to the treasury. Then the legal elder turned to the market matter. Madame Binta trembled visibly. In the eyes of the law, said the elder, your assault upon this young man was not the greatest crime before us, but it was of the same family. It sprang from the same poisoned root, that some lives may be stepped on because they appear unprotected. Madame Binta fell to her knees. Mercy, she whispered. Quito looked at her. He remembered the dust, the laughter, the water bleeding into earth, the look on her face when she believed he was safely beneath her forever. Mother Zawadi had once said that healing is not forgetting. It is remembering without allowing the wound to choose the shape of your soul. Quito stood again. His voice broke on the first word, then held. Stand. Madame Binta looked up, confused. Stand, he repeated. She obeyed shakily. Return every coin made by cheating stallholders this season. Repair the well cover near the goat lane. And, for 1 year, no widow, orphan, or disabled seller pays market tax at your stall line. You will pay it. The hall murmured again, louder this time. It was not the punishment Madame Binta expected. It was worse in one way, and better in another. Worse because it forced her to serve the very people she had despised. Better because it left her with a path back toward usefulness, if she had the courage to walk it. The legal elder nodded. So ordered. Madam Binta bowed until her forehead nearly touched the floor. Whether from gratitude, shame, or both, only she and God knew. The following week, the palace held a private restoration rite. Not the old naming ceremony, repeated exactly, because lost time cannot be reenacted like theatre, but a quiet acknowledgement before ancestors, chiefs, and witnesses that Quito was indeed Prince Chuma Adisa, firstborn son of the late king, and rightful heir by blood and law. He wore no heavy crown that day. He asked not to. He said with halting honesty that weight on his head still made him feel like someone else's story. The Queen smiled through tears and agreed. So instead, Lady Ifara placed around his shoulders a simple indigo cloth embroidered with a silver crescent moon. And when the drums sounded in the courtyard, not loudly, but deep and steady, Prince Chuma, Quito still in all the places that mattered, lifted his face to the sound and let it enter him. Months passed. Voice returned by degrees, not perfectly, not all at once. There remained a rasp in it, a memory of injury that never fully left. But people learned to lean in when he spoke, and that, strangely, made them listen better than they had ever listened to men who shouted. He trained with tutors in law, history, finance, diplomacy, agriculture, and military command. He learned letters he had never been allowed to study. He stumbled sometimes, became angry sometimes, left lessons unfinished sometimes, because grief is not cured by revelation. It only changes shape. But he also learned quickly. There was a fierce intelligence in him, sharpened by years of watching silently while others talked too much. He kept one habit from the market. Each seventh day, he rose before dawn and walked, with minimal escort, to Mavuno. At first, the market did not know what to do with that. A prince at the water lane. A prince standing where a poor mute boy had once sold cupfuls from cracked calabashes. But Chuma returned again and again. He inspected waits, spoke to widows, sat with the old bean seller Juma, checked whether Madam Binta had honored the tax order. She had. In fact, under the crushing education of public shame, she had become almost painfully fair. Tade and Moro no longer laughed at anyone weaker than themselves. Fear had taught them what morality had failed to teach. The broken shade post near the centre lane was replaced with a proper, covered stand, and a stone basin fed from a new well line, funded by fines taken from Salim's seized accounts. Chuma insisted it be named Mama Sella Fountain. When Queen Naima asked him why, he answered in the now slower but surer voice of a man reclaiming both speech and memory. Because when the kingdom lost me, she kept me alive. Thrones count blood. God counts hands. The Queen said nothing for a moment after that. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder and looked out over the market, where his old life and new life now touched. 1 year later, during the rains, the story of the silent village boy had spread beyond the kingdom's borders. Traders told it on caravan roads. Fishermen told it beside reed fires. Mothers told it to children who had begun confusing loudness with strength. And though each retelling changed small details, the heart of it remained the same. A boy humiliated in public was seen by the one person whose sight could change history. A hidden scar told a truth power had tried to erase. A stolen child came home. A voice taken in cruelty returned in justice. And those who had mistaken silence for weakness learned too late that some of the strongest souls in this world are the ones who survive without the protection others take for granted. As for Prince Chuma, he never stopped carrying one empty calabash in the palace storeroom. Attendants once asked why he kept such a poor, cracked thing among polished brass and carved chests. He answered with a slight smile, "So I never forget what the dust felt like." And perhaps that was why people came to trust him long before he wore any future crown. Because he did not speak like a man born above suffering. He spoke like someone who had lived under it, walked through it, and come out with enough mercy left to keep from becoming its servant. The old fountain at Mamasela Square still runs at dawn. The traders still argue. The goats still behave like goats. The sun still rises over red earth and woven stalls, and voices bargaining over tomatoes and cloth and millet and soap. But no one in Mavuno Market now pretends not to see the poor when they are pushed. Because once, in that very place, a queen stopped her carriage for a silent boy.
Press the subscribe button for many new untold African folktales, only on Untold African.